Right now, a lot of the world appears to be falling apart. Significant portions of it across the globe are on fire and animal species are being wiped out at a devastating rate. So while everything is going on here, and it's a lot in the US, meanwhile in okay, that music's a little bit happy, but meanwhile in the Amazon, there are fires going out of control. And I wanna give you some numbers, give you an idea of the scope of this, but one thing that I think will make the scope pretty clear is when you take a look at this. This stood out yesterday, so this is a tweet. Just a little alert to the world. The sky randomly turned dark today in Sao Paulo, and meteorologists believe it's smoke from the fires burning thousands of kilometers away. Imagine how much has to be burning to create that much smoke. And Sao Paulo is 1,700 miles away from these forest fires. And the fires are so significant that the smoke can not only be seen by satellite, but it can be felt by people living 1,700 miles away. I saw, by the way, people collected rainwater from that city as this was going on, and the water was black and smelled obviously like smoke. That's how bad this is, how big this is. And right now, the worst of it is going on, but it's been a problem for some time. There have been, at this point now, more than 74,000 fires in Brazil this year, with more than half in the Amazon region. That's more than an 80% increase compared with the same period last year, which is still a gigantic problem and a huge number of fires, but it is truly out of control right now. Now, there are forest fires, in Brazil, in the Amazon, around the world, that happens, okay? And so simply there being a forest fire by itself doesn't make it newsworthy, but when you see how much more significant the numbers are, the acreage, all of that, this is a warning sign that both the policies governing that area are out of whack, but also our approach to climate change and creating the conditions where these sorts of fires can proliferate are 100% out of whack. And the stakes literally couldn't be higher. As we were just talking about last week, when we were talking about the Amazon, it's often referred to as the planet's lungs, producing 20% of the oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere. And it is not a shock that this is going on in the Amazon right now. It's not a mystery as to why it's going on in the Amazon right now. There are a lot of factors, that's true, but the political leadership of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, he doesn't care. He's not interested in maintaining the rainforest. We talked about back during the election more than a year ago what his approach to the Amazon would likely be, and we are seeing now that play out on a daily basis. So let's take a look at a couple of the ways this has manifested recently. So just weeks ago, the director of the National Institute for Space Research in Brazil was fired after an argument with Bolsonaro. The director had defended satellite data that showed deforestation was 88% higher in June than a year earlier. Bolsonaro called the findings lies and sacked the director for daring to point out what the satellites made clear. They're not lies, it's not fake news, it's right there in front of us, we can see it. But he doesn't care because he has an economic interest in stripping down every foot possible of the Amazon for development. And now take a look at these most recent fires. What is Bolsonaro's approach to it? Is it this is both a national and an international tragedy that we need to stop? No, it's pointing the finger perversely at the exact wrong person. So he said crime exists and we need to make sure that this type of crime does not increase. We took money away from the NGOs. They are now feeling the pinch from the lack of funding. So maybe the NGO types are conducting these criminal acts in order to generate negative attention against me and against the Brazilian government. This is the war we are facing. Now, if it's not clear what the hell he's talking about there, what he's saying is NGOs, non-governmental organizations, they are purposefully setting these forest fires because they're angry that their funding was cut. So these NGOs, which exist, some of them, just to stop the Amazon from being destroyed, are willing to burn down a significant chunk of it because they're angry. That's what he's saying. It's insulting, it's stupid, but it's not out of the pattern for Bolsonaro. And to give you an idea of that pattern, the Brazil's Environmental Enforcement Agency has seen its budget cut by $23 million already. So he's getting out in front of this problem fast, make sure that it gets worse. And it is a gigantic problem. I mean, not only for the number of species that are dying, and a significant chunk of all the species in the entirety of the earth live in the Amazon, not only for the natural beauty, the natural value of it, but also its ability to help us fight climate change, produce oxygen for the world, but also what could happen to the planet if it were to be destroyed. Environmental activists and organizations like the World Wildlife Fund warn that if the Amazon reaches a point of no return, the rainforest could become a dry savanna, no longer habitable for much of its wildlife. If this happens, instead of being a source of oxygen, it could start emitting carbon, the major driver of climate change. Some of that to some extent is happening right now with the fires, but the idea there is if a certain threshold is reached, it will not be able to sustain itself. Despite the fact that you think of this as a very wet area, once it's destroyed, once it's cleared, it can't regenerate like a lot of other types of forest can. And historically, there's a lot of reason to believe that we are halfway to that threshold already. Despite all of the progress over the past few decades of stopping deforestation and things like that, international efforts as well as groups inside of Brazil, we've already progressed halfway there. With Bolsonaro in charge, there's every reason to believe that we will reach that threshold. Now, he has insultingly talked about this conversation saying, if what you say is true, if deforestation is so bad, it would already be a savanna. He literally said that recently. Well, a gigantic portion of the Amazon was torn down over the past few decades. It took an international effort back in the 90s to just briefly cut the degree that it was being destroyed. But in recent years, that has started again. That was even before Bolsonaro. But now Bolsonaro, he doesn't care about any of the native peoples that live in the area. He cares about the corporations that want to do agriculture there. And it's a short-term plan at best, even economically, even if that's your only concern, because this sort of territory, once it's stripped clear and used for agriculture, it's not the sort of territory that can sustain farming for a long time. So he's willing to perhaps irreparably damage the Earth's environment for a couple of years, a decade of cattle grazing and farming, basically. That's his priority. It's economic. For us, it needs to be environmental, but it's not gonna be unless we put massive international pressure on his government to take the problem seriously, take the fires seriously, and stop the blatant wanton destruction of the Amazon. Here on the Damage Report, we talk a lot about the big banks and their ways of getting rich off the poor. They saturate the market, but there are other options. And I've got info on a socially and environmentally responsible financial institution that has no ATM fees, gives you cash back on every purchase. They even commit 10% of their earnings to charity. It's called Aspiration, and if you go to aspiration.com/TYT to sign up, you'll get these perks, and that's more money to spend or to save or to spend. Just treat yourself.